Hi, I'm Chris from CodeReviewVideos.com, and in this video we're going to cover a little thing that I like to do in projects where I'm running PHPUnit or PHP spec quite regularly, and that's to set up a little watcher. Now, if you've ever used JavaScript's Jest test framework, you'll have seen this, and you're probably quite envious, like I was, that such functionality isn't sort of available out of the box with your standard PHP test libraries like PHPUnit, PHP spec, and so on. Effectively, what it does is it allows you to watch specific files, specific directories, such as the source directory or the tests directory, as we'll get momentarily when I run this command. So this is a brand new Symfony 4.1 project. It doesn't really matter just doing that because I know a lot of people who watch CodeReviewVideos.com use Symfony, so yeah, it seems like a decent example to use. So PHPUnit Bridge, if you're not aware, is the simplest way to get started using PHPUnit inside a Symfony project. It comes with a few defaults and that to make it easier to work with a standard Symfony project. So once we've done that, we get a new command, which is vendor bin simple PHPUnit, and if we run that on my machine at least, we hit upon a problem, and that's that we require this zip extension, and I don't have that, which is kind of fine because it highlights a problem anyway, that I'm trying to do stuff local to my machine. So if I was to install the zip PHP extension on my local machine, then if someone else in the team or in an open source world pulled this project down, they may hit on this problem too. So the way that I get around this personally is to use Docker. Now, this is a little bit contentious maybe, but it works for me. So I'm going to show you how I do this. I have a Docker file, which is okay. It's trying to add that stuff in that it's just created for me. But anyway, so I've got the Docker file and it pulls down from PHP 7, which is an image that I build personally, which I use as the base of all my PHP projects. So at the moment, that's PHP 7.2.7, which is the very latest as far as I'm aware. It doesn't really matter too much. And all of this stuff we've covered before. If you're unsure on any of it, there's a tutorial series on the site called Docker for Beginners, which I would highly recommend. All this is going to do is it's going to take a working directory argument, which we'll see again in a second, which is just basically going to allow me to map the root directory here into this working directory inside the container. I'm going to copy everything from the root, which won't really matter because we'll override it anyway. That's partly just there for building if you was to take this into production or use this in a continuous integration environment as I do. Again, composer install step, not really too relevant. Again, it's there for continuous integration. It's going to change ownership of everything recursively to the www data user. This is going to be important. I think this should give the user the ID of 33, which is going to cause us a bit of a problem, no doubt. And then user, this is going to set the active user inside the running container. And then it's going to map this volume, which we don't really, again, need to worry about. I've already run the Docker build against this. I have a make file that does this for me. I've just run make build. What that's done is it's made an image locally of the Docker file that we've just reviewed, and it's taken the working directory as var www.dev. So inside the container, when we run this container based off that image, we're going to be in the var www.dev directory. Not hugely important, but yeah, anyway. And we've tagged that as the test watcher example. Now this command here just allows me to bring up an environment quickly. And again, none of this is super important. It's just how I do things. So finally, we've got the Docker compose file, which in this case just has one service, which is called PHP. It takes that test watcher example as our Docker image, and it maps our local directory, our current working directory, into the container as var www.dev. Okay, that's a very long-winded introduction, but that's how this is all going to work. And the reason that that's important is because, as we've just seen, that PHP extension is missing locally, but on that image, the zip extension should be there. So I can run the command docker compose against the PHP service, and I want to use the PHP binary inside that running container to run the command vendor bin simple PHPUnit. And you can probably understand why I don't want to keep typing that long-winded command. I've missed an exec there. Docker compose exec. Again, kind of highlights why I don't want to. I've not even brought the environment up. Flipping heck, come on now, make dev. It's going to bring the environment up. Continuously highlighting why I don't enjoy this process. So now it should work, even though we're probably going to get an error, which is saying, yeah, we've got some permissions problems. Let's cancel out of that. So if we take a look at this directory, you can see we're owned by Chris and Chris, as in the user Chris, the group Chris. Inside the Docker container, so if I up arrow that, and instead of running a PHP command, I've run the ls.la. You can see that everything's owned by 1000, 1000. The problem is, again, run a different command. If we run who am I to see who we are, we should be the www data user. And if we run ID to get the ID of that user, we'll see that the www data user has the ID of 33. which is why there's no permissions there, because basically www.data doesn't have permission to anything 1000. Anyway, so the quickest solution to this, that I'm aware of at least, is to change the ownership, and I'm going to do that recursively to change everything in my local to be owned by Chris as the owning user and www.data as the owning group on the local directory. Get a couple of ownership permissions not allowed. That's because our container's running, but that should have resolved the problem. So again, take a look at the LSLA. I can see now at least that the owning user is 1000, but the owning group is www.data. Our user is part of that group, so we should have permission to write. Phew, quite long-winded. So now again, we'll take all this out and we'll run the vendor bin simple PHPUnit. See where that gets us. In the meantime, I'm going to add that same command to the make file. So we'll call that run tests. And what that's going to do is going to go docker compose exec on the PHP container running the PHP binary vendor bin simple PHPUnit. So at least the next time that we want to run that command, instead of having to remember it all or go through the history, we can just run make run underscore tests, and it's going to run that long command for us. So it's actually gone ahead and tried to run that. It's going to run anything inside this tests directory. We don't have anything in the tests directory. So let's create something. We'll just create some service. After all, this is a Symfony project, and we'll just say this is myservice.php. And I've missed the extension there, so we'll just rename that. So let's call it myservice.test. So set this up. Standard PHP file in the namespace of app tests. And we're in the service directory. So I'm just going to declare the strict types of 1, something I'm doing more and more lately. Not that it really matters in a test, but I'm going to declare this final. Nothing should be extending a test, but anyway, final class, it's just a nice habit to get into. My service test, and we're going to extend the PHPUnit test case. And we'll just do a very quick test, which will just be test for truthy. And we'll just say this, assert true, false. Okay, so we should have a failing test, so we can rerun that. And we get our failing test, failed asserting that false is true. But again, if we was to fix this or declare another test or whatever, then we're going to have to rerun that command every single time. And I find that really tedious, especially as, you know, normally on a normal project, you're doing other stuff on the command line as well. So you end up either having a couple of like sessions open or some weird setup, or just keep going through the history. As I said, I just find it really tedious. There is a better solution to this, which is what the whole video is supposed to be about. I'm going to create a new file, which I'm going to call run tests on change. That's a bash script. So we'll start off with our hashbang bin shell. And this is where you can get creative, basically. It depends on what you want to do. In my case, I want to monitor both the source and the tests directory. So I'm going to define a couple of variables. Directory 1 is going to be the output of a print working directory. So in this case, that should be var www.dev. And we're going to look inside the source directory. I'm going to duplicate that and look inside the tests directory as well. So essentially that's our source and tests covered. So anytime we make a change in there, we want to rerun our tests. So what I'm going to use is a tool called inotifywait. And there's 3 crucial flags here. Firstly, we're going to use the quiet mode. Don't need all the verbose output. Secondly is recursive, because we don't want to just monitor the top level directory. We want to make sure everything underneath is monitored too. And we want to monitor a specific event, which is the modify event. So anytime a file is modified, we want to rerun a specific command. And we want to do this based on our 2 directories. So we've got 2 directories, dir1 and dir2. And we'll just wrap up that while loop. And all we want to do is make run tests. So in other words, that long command is kind of masked away behind a couple of layers. So we should now be able to run our shell script in the bin directory, which is to run tests on change. Okay, so it's just kind of waiting there, which is exactly what you would expect. So we'll define another test. So test falsy. And we'll say this is for assert false, which is false. And there we go. Now, whenever we make a change inside either of those 2 directories, we're going to get the tests run automatically.